In March this year, a quiet yet powerful voice echoed across the globe. The English version of the Dalai Lama's memoir, A Voice for the Voiceless, was officially published. At 90 years old, the Dalai Lama is not just a religious figure, but a symbol of Tibetan identity, of spiritual resilience, of peaceful resistance. And in this book, he does something profound. He opens the final chapter of his life, and with it, potentially, the final chapter of an entire institution that has shaped Tibet for more than 500 years. Naturally, this memoir sent ripples through the international media. But one question has gripped the world, particularly Tibetan communities in exile and observers of Chinese politics. Will there be a 15th Dalai Lama? And more critically, who gets to decide? Part 1. The Political Theology of Reincarnation. Reincarnation, to outsiders, may sound spiritual, symbolic, poetic, but in Tibetan Buddhism, it is foundational. The Dalai Lama is believed to be the incarnation of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, reborn again and again to guide the Tibetan people. But the Chinese Communist Party, a self-declared atheist regime, has now claimed the right to decide who reincarnates and how. This contradiction is nothing short of absurd. A party that crushed temples, censors religious texts, and imprisons monks, now insists that the Dalai Lama must reincarnate and, more importantly, reincarnate on Chinese soil. Why? Because the stakes are not spiritual, they are geopolitical. Part 2. Mao's Poison, the Party's Paradox. Let's rewind to 1954. The young 14th Dalai Lama traveled to Beijing to attend the National People's Congress. There, he met Mao Zedong. During one private conversation, Mao reportedly took his hand and said, "Religion is poison. It poisons the minds of the people." That statement was clear. The CCP was not interested in coexisting with Tibetan Buddhism. It sought to eliminate it. And during the Cultural Revolution, that agenda was brutally executed. Monasteries were demolished, scriptures burned, monks sent to labor camps. Yet decades later, that same atheist government is now demanding that the Dalai Lama reincarnate and accusing him of blasphemy for saying he might not. Why does this matter so much to them? Because the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama is not just a religious ritual, it is the transfer of immense symbolic power. Whoever controls that process controls the loyalty of millions of Tibetans, both in Tibet and in exile. Part 3. A Voice for the Exiled, and the Letters That Changed His Mind. In his memoir, the Dalai Lama recalls the moment when his thinking began to shift. In 2011, he gave an interview suggesting he might be the last Dalai Lama, that there may be no reincarnation, that maybe the tradition had fulfilled its purpose. But what followed was an outpouring of emotion. Letters flooded in from Tibetans around the world, from Lhasa, from Amdo, from Dharamsala, from Nepal, from Brooklyn and Zurich. They all pleaded with him, "Reincarnate. Don't let the light go out." The Dalai Lama was deeply moved. In the memoir, he writes that he has decided to reincarnate, but not in China. The next Dalai Lama, he says, will be born among the free Tibetan communities abroad, perhaps in India, where he now lives in exile, or in Europe, or North America, but never in territory under Beijing's control. And with that statement, the battle over reincarnation and legitimacy was drawn more sharply than ever before. Part 4. The 14th's Origins, a Child in Shanghai. The story of the current Dalai Lama began in 1935. He was born as Lama Dondap in a humble family of herders in Shanghai province, heart of the greater Tibetan cultural region. After the 13th Dalai Lama died in 1933, senior monks began the traditional search for his reincarnation. Guided by visions, signs, and rituals, the search party arrived at Lama Dondap's home in 1937. The boy passed every test, identifying the previous Dalai Lama's belongings, speaking in the manner of an adult Lama. He was recognized as the 14th Dalai Lama. In 1940, his enthronement took place in Lhasa. By 1950, at just 15 years old, he found himself not just a spiritual figure, but the political leader of Tibet as the Chinese People's Liberation Army was marching toward his homeland. Part 5. The 17-Point Agreement and the Fall of Lhasa. In 1951, under pressure and threat of violence, Tibetan representatives signed the 17-Point Agreement with the People's Republic of China. The CCP called it a peaceful liberation. Many Tibetans saw it as the beginning of occupation. By 1959, tensions erupted into open conflict. The Dalai Lama fled Tibet after a failed uprising in Lhasa, crossing the Himalayas into India with a few trusted aides. That exile continues to this day. From his base in Dharamsala, the Dalai Lama established the Central Tibetan Administration, a government in exile. Though unrecognized officially by most countries, it functions with a parliament, judiciary, and prime minister. Part 6. Beijing reaches out, the secret diplomacy begins. In 1979, a surprising message arrived. Yellow Thondup, the Dalai Lama's elder brother, was invited to meet Deng Xiaoping. At first, he hesitated, but eventually, with the Dalai Lama's consent, under the condition of no negotiations, only listening, he agreed. In Beijing, Yellow Thondup met top officials. Deng Xiaoping famously said, "Except independence, everything can be discussed." What followed was a brief window of possibility. From 1979 to 1982, for Tibetan delegations from Dharamsala visited Tibet. What they saw devastated them. Monasteries destroyed, monks absent, cultural artifacts ruined. And yet, wherever they went, Tibetans came in tears, pressing letters into their hands, begging them to pass messages to His Holiness. More than 7,000 letters were collected. Part 7. The mischances, lost trust, lost timing. There were moments when history could have bent in another direction. In 1989, when the Panchen Lama died, Deng Xiaoping invited the Dalai Lama to preside over the funeral. Dharamsala refused, fearing a trap. In the early 1990s, secret letters were exchanged about finding the Panchen Lama's reincarnation. But just before an agreement could be reached, the Dalai Lama publicly announced his recognition of a boy in Tibet without informing Beijing. The Chinese government was enraged. That boy disappeared, becoming the world's youngest political prisoner. A state-sanctioned Panchen Lama was installed in his place. These missteps destroyed trust. By the mid-1990s, under Jiang Zemin, the door to negotiations effectively closed. Part 8. The Middle Way and Carter's Warning. In 1987, the Dalai Lama unveiled his Middle Way, a path between full independence and total assimilation. Tibet would not seek separation, but demanded meaningful autonomy. President Jimmy Carter quietly encouraged the plan but warned, the Greater Tibet Framework, seeking autonomy not only for the Tibet Autonomous Region, but for all Tibetan cultural areas in Qinghai, Gansu, Sichuan, and Yunnan, was likely a bridge too far. Han settlers already vastly outnumbered Tibetans in many of those areas. Indeed, in 2015, Beijing formally rejected the Middle Way. They said the idea of Greater Tibet was unrealistic and even discriminatory, as it suggested expelling non-Tibetans from certain regions. Part 9. 9 rounds of negotiations, a flicker before darkness. Between 2002 and 2010, the Chinese government held 9 rounds of talks with the Dalai Lama's envoys. The lead Tibetan negotiator was Gyari Lodi Gyaltsen, a seasoned diplomat who advocated the Middle Way. But the talks were stifled by Beijing's refusal to allow any recognition of Dharamsala as a government. They insisted that the Dalai Lama could only send personal envoys. This contradiction became impossible to sustain after the Dalai Lama officially stepped down from political leadership in 2011. Since then, formal talks have ceased. Part 10. Xi Jinping's calculation, time is power. Under Xi Jinping, the strategy has changed. No more engagement. No more compromises. Instead, patience. The Dalai Lama is 90. The clock is ticking. The Chinese state believes time is on its side. That when the Dalai Lama dies, they can unveil their own reincarnation, carefully groomed, educated, and ultimately loyal to the party, just like the Panchen Lama they installed decades ago. Meanwhile, the Dalai Lama insists his reincarnation will be born outside China. This sets the stage for the next geopolitical drama, to Dalai Lamas, to competing truths, and one global test of faith. Part 11. Cooked fish, tanks, and the illusion of control. The Dalai Lama once recounted what Agya Rinpoche, a senior Lama, told him about the CCP's worldview. Taiwan is a fish in the sea, dangerous, but too far to catch. Hong Kong is a fish in a tank, contained, but not fully consumed. Tibet is a cooked fish already on the table. This explains the CCP's hardline stance. There's nothing more to negotiate. But fish have bones. and memories. Closing reflection. So what happens next? On his birthday this July, the Dalai Lama is expected to issue a final statement about his reincarnation plan. Will he declare the process for identifying his successor? Will he appoint senior lamas to lead the search? Whatever he announces, Beijing will oppose it. 2 boys will one day grow up, one in Tibet, one in exile, and the world will be forced to choose not just between 2 Dalai Lamas, but between 2 futures. The next chapter of Tibetan Buddhism is still unwritten, and so we wait.